God on the Move.
So he did what so many people do today, and he just went on Google. And when he went on Google, he started searching Jewish, God, Muslims, and I'm not sure exactly how, but he got to the Jews for Jesus website. He's really intrigued by it. So they start meeting regularly, studying the scriptures together, and praise God, he comes to faith in Jesus. He's now a Jewish disciple of Jesus. He's a Christian, our brother. And God is calling him to reach out to this Muslim family with the gospel.
Today, less than 2% of the world Jewry believe Jesus to be Israel's Messiah. For different reasons, many Christians today do not see the need for Jewish evangelism. Some believe that the church has lost its right to proclaim the gospel to Jewish people because of church history, especially the Holocaust. Others read the Bible to say that Jews have their own way to God and therefore do not need to hear or believe in Jesus as their Messiah and Savior. But if Jesus is not the Messiah for all, he's not the Messiah at all. You are listening to the God on the Move podcast. This Lausanne Movement production is part of a wider initiative dedicated to sharing testimonies of God's work across the world for every believer. And this is a story about Jewish evangelism. The voice you heard earlier is Dan Serrett. He's a Jewish believer in Jesus and servant of Christ. And this is his story.
My name is Dan Serrett, and I am the Lausanne Catalyst on Jewish evangelism. And I also serve as the president for the Lausanne Network on Jewish evangelism. And that's kind of what I do for Lausanne, but my full-time job is Chief Operating Officer and Global Director for a ministry that's called the Jews for Jesus. And the reason why I am passionate about Jewish evangelism and sharing the gospel with Jewish people and serving with Jews for Jesus is because it's very personal for me. I am a Jewish person. I was born and raised in Israel. And if somebody wouldn't have gone out of their comfort zone and come to me and shared the gospel with me, I wouldn't be on this podcast. Jewish people, most Jewish people on the globe are unreached with the gospel. And many in the Jewish community are not even engaged with the gospel. And of course, Lausanne is all about bringing Christ to all and sharing the gospel with everyone. And that includes Jewish people. We're a part of the everyone. So when Jesus gave the Great Commission and talked about making disciples of all nations, that includes the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. It includes Israel. And we see that very much in the Gospels and in the Bible. So for me, it's personal because nobody on my side of the family are believers. I'm the only one. And my mom, my dad, my brother, nieces, aunts, uncles, cousins, So for me, it's more than just a job and it's more than just being engaged in it, but it's extremely personal.
At this point, I mentioned how ironic I find that there is still debate around the topic whether it's appropriate to share the gospel with Jews, when the very early church discussed whether the gospel could be shared with Gentiles.
That was exactly what the Jerusalem Council that we have recorded in the book of Acts was all about. The apostles, the disciples were really struggling with, hey, what do we do with this gospel message? Should we bring it to the Gentiles? And if Gentiles come to faith, what does it mean? Do they need to now become Jewish? Should they go through circumcision? Do we need to make sure that they come under the Jewish understanding, Jewish rituals, because now they embrace Jesus? And aren't you glad, and most of the people who are listening to this, aren't you glad that the answer was no? The gospel is for everybody. Gentiles should come to faith in Jesus, and no, they don't have to become Jewish, and they don't have to come under some of the rituals, and they don't have to be circumcised, and we should bring the gospel to everyone, because the gospel is not about our rituals and do we celebrate this, how do we do this or that. It's all about Jesus, and it's all about embracing Jesus, and Jesus is above and beyond all of these things, and it's all about just believing in him, living for him, and of course doing what he told us to do, which is to make disciples of all nations. So it is very ironic how we flipped that question. And let me just say that it is a question that many struggle with. Should we share the gospel with Jewish people? And we're so grateful that the Lausanne Covenant and the Cape Town Commitment and the L4 Statement, all these answer that very directly and precisely, that the gospel is for everyone, including Jewish people. At the Cape Town Commitment, there's actually some language talking about how the gospel needs to go to Jewish people as well as everyone else. And it is difficult, and we do face that question. And I would say that as we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism in the world, the question, is it anti-Semitic to share the gospel with Jewish people? I would say that actually it's anti-Semitic not to share the gospel with Jewish people. That's the worst form of anti-Semitism in my book, because for me, the most important thing is the gospel. And when we keep the gospel from people, that is not an act of love. So many people say, hey, if I share the gospel with a Jewish person, that's going to offend them. And that could be true. But the bottom line is that wouldn't you share something that's so important and so vital to you with somebody else? And we should share the gospel with everybody. And yes, sometimes the gospel causes offense, and we can talk about that, but not sharing the gospel with Jewish people is anti-Semitic. And that's my story as well. And I'm so grateful that somebody shared the gospel with me, because I was unreached and unengaged with the gospel, as are most people in Israel. I was born and raised in Israel. I was born and raised in a typical Israeli Jewish home, secular. Most Jewish people in Israel, most of the Jewish people in the world are secular. So I wasn't an Orthodox Jew, but rather was brought up in a secular home where my parents are actually atheists. They don't even believe in God. And we should stop here and say that's the reality of most Jewish people. Most Jewish people in the world today are either atheists or agnostics. Okay, I know that many times when we think of somebody Jewish, we think of those who are dressed in black with the big hat and the yarmulkes, and those are the Orthodox Jews, but they're a minority among Jewish people. Only about 7% of the Jewish people on the globe today are Orthodox Jews. So most Jews in the United States, where I'm from, and where I live right now, most Jewish people in Israel, where I'm from, most of the Jewish people in Europe, they're secular. And that was my upbringing. I was born in Israel, but my parents weren't born in Israel. My parents were born in Romania. And they immigrated to Israel with their parents when they were teenagers. And they met in Israel. And of course, fell in love, had 2 children, myself and my brother. And we were just raised in a typical Jewish Israeli home, where in Israel, the Jewish holidays are celebrated. Those are kind of like the national holidays. So we would celebrate those holidays, those feasts. And for me, that's all I knew. I knew I was Jewish, and this is what we do. And that meant something very deep to me as a child. I loved, and I still do love those holidays, love those feasts. And I remember, even though I understood that my parents didn't really believe in the story of Exodus, of the story we tell in Passover, for example, for me, it was real. And I really believed it, and I loved it. And when I started going to the school, in Israel at the public school, we do learn the Old Testament. They don't teach it as necessarily true, but it's definitely a part of our story, of the Israeli story, right? So we kind of read there and we learn some of the narratives that we find there. So the more I read and learned of all those favorite Old Testament stories, the more my faith in God only increased. But I didn't know what to really do with it. And there were Orthodox Jews in Israel that I was aware of course. But it was never really attractive to me, the rules and regulation. It seemed very foreign to my life. So, I was just a kid, teenager, didn't really know what to do with my faith in God. And then when I was 14, my entire life changed. And it changed because my dad's job moved us from Israel to New York. So my brother was now engaged in studies and doing a program with the Israeli Defense Forces, the Army, because he was 18, I was 14. But my mom and I moved with my dad to the States. And so I graduated from high school in New York. And now all of a sudden I was a diaspora Jew, right? I was a Jewish guy, Israeli, living on Long Island in New York. A lot of Jewish people were around me, but it felt different. And I graduated from high school and then started attending university, Stony Brook University. And again, it's on Long Island in New York. And I love math, so I was studying mathematics. I figured pretty quickly that there's a lot of students that need help in math, that struggle with math. So I started tutoring students through the university. just as a job. And one time I was just helping this girl with all of her math questions, right? Her homework for her math class. And I was helping her and explaining to her. And as I was helping her, she recognized my accent in English. And she said to me, "Hey, are you Russian?" And I said, "No, actually, I'm not from Russia at all. I'm actually from Israel. I'm Israeli." And she kind of said, "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm Jewish as well." So that was kind of like a connection point. And, she wasn't the first Jewish person that I met on campus, but I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. So we have something in common," right? And so we continued talking and, helping her. And we just kind of moved away a little bit from math. And at some point she tells me, "I'm Jewish, but I need to let you know that I believe in Yeshua." Now, being fluent in Hebrew, right away, I recognize this word Yeshua, because Yeshua is a common Hebrew word, and it's the word for salvation. But she says, "I believe in Yeshua," so I figured that she's referring to this word as a name, but this word is not used as a name in Israel today. I've never heard of it used as a name, so I asked her, "Who is Yeshua that you believe in?" And she told me that it was Jesus. And I was really surprised, curious. I've never met somebody who was Jewish and believed in Jesus. I never knew that Jesus's Hebrew name, that Jesus had a Hebrew name that meant salvation, So I was like, wow, that's very interesting. We both had to go. It was the end of the day. And then I said, "Hey, can we meet for lunch and talk more about this?" And she said, "Absolutely." So a few days later, we met together for lunch. And then she brought with her to this lunch a book. And I said to her, "Hey, what's this book?" She goes, "Oh, it's a Bible." I said, "Okay, well, that's kind of interesting, So we sat for lunch and she opens up the Bible to me, the Old Testament, and she starts telling me about all this criteria for the Messiah, sharing with me prophecies about him. And I said, "Wow, yeah, that makes sense." Now, some of the stuff that she shared with me, criteria for the Messiah that I knew about, like the Messiah being from the line of David, Messiah being from the tribe of Judah. Some of these prophecies I knew. But then she also shared with me some prophecies that I've never heard before, like the prophecy that the Messiah would come and suffer for us, right? Isaiah 53, or that he would be born in Bethlehem. Micah 5:1 and 2. So that was kind of surprising to me. And then she said, "Hey, the reason why I believe in Jesus, because Jesus, Yeshua, fulfilled these prophecies." And then she flipped to the New Testament. And she started showing me passages and read to me how Yeshua fulfilled these prophecies. Now, for me, this was the first time I've ever saw a New Testament. I've never flipped it, never saw verses there, never anything. This was the first time. And as I was reading it with her, it was definitely, anytime somebody comes to faith, it's a supernatural thing, right? I mean, it's always a miracle. It's always something God does. And for me, I really felt like a light went on in my head. It made perfect sense. The Bible talks about how Jewish people have a veil, right? It was like the veil was removed. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And this makes sense. And I said to her, "So what are my parents going to think about this?" Which, when somebody says that, it kind of indicates that they believe, And for me, that was it. And she said to me, "Your parents might not be as excited as you are about this." She kind of gave me a heads up. And I said to her, "Well, I got to tell my parents before I make this commitment, because it's such an important step for me." And I was still living with my parents. I was commuting to school. I was 18 years old. So it was really important for me to share with them. So it took me a few days to kind of talk to them about it, not knowing what they would think. And for them, it was also first time they've ever heard of it. And they're like, "What? We don't know. Jewish people don't believe in Jesus. And what? Christian?" But it didn't really make much sense to them. They weren't really sure what this is about. So they kind of said, "Okay, this is ridiculous. This is wrong. But whatever is good for you, go for it. You'll come to your senses." And that was wonderful for me, that initial reaction that they had, because I was able to go back and talk to her and say, "Hey, listen, I believe this is amazing." And she said to me, "Well, you need to dedicate your life. You're willing to pray." And that's how I kind of came to faith.
Before we continue with the story, I want to let you know that you can now join the God on the Move community on the Lausanne Action Hub. Be part of the conversation, see exclusive content, and share your own testimony. You can find the link to join the community in the podcast description. Also, if you have a story to share or know someone who might have, please contact us at podcast@lausanne.org. That is podcast@lausanne.org.
Now, I have to say two things. First of all, 2 years after that event, this girl and I got married. So this is Dina, my wife, and she's the first one to share the gospel with me. And I'm so grateful that she did, obviously, because God used her to bring me to himself. But in the process of all of it, we also fell in love and we got married. So praise God for that as well, right? After I came to faith, I started to go into congregation. I started to be discipled, kind of the normal process, right? And of course, Dina was very helpful, but I joined the congregation and church and was getting discipled. And, I was very hungry for the word, as we find a lot of new believers. And 3 months into my faith, approximately, when I decided to get baptized. And of course, that was an incredible experience for me personally, but it was also something that my parents realized that this is a step that showed them that I was really committed and that Jesus and the gospel was becoming a main part of my life. At first, I think they thought faith was just kind of like a phase and that I would grow out of it, that I would move away from it. But after my baptism, shortly after that, my parents said, this is not good. We can't agree with this. So they started doing everything they can to prevent me from believing, as if it was in their power. So first of all, they sent me to see an anti-missionary rabbi, a famous rabbi, Rabbi Tuvia Singer. And then they had me meet with him because they were convinced that he was going to show me how Jesus is not the Jewish Messiah. But that obviously didn't work. So then they thought, wow, Dan, you must be crazy, And they sent me to see a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And at some point they're like, well, we're seeing how you're getting more involved with Jews for Jesus and they're a cult. So they actually did like a whole family intervention and they brought in somebody who's an occult expert and to talk to me and to the whole family. Nothing really helped. And finally they said, we can't stomach this. You can't stay with us. We want you out of the house. So they disowned me. And I remember the day that I was coming to the house to grab my things and to move out. And my dad showed up and he kind of lost it, and he started beating me up. So it was very, very intense time. For a while, we had no relationship. And obviously, when Dina and I got married, they didn't come to the wedding, and it was very difficult. Dina and I got married in August 99. And then in January 2000, we joined the Ministry of Jews for Jesus, where we still serve today. And after our time of some training in New York City, we were sent to Israel. So most of our lives, we lived in Israel. And all 3 of our kids were born in Israel. And, grandparents really love grandkids. They have a very unique relationship with them. And when we moved to Israel, that was a good testimony for my parents. And then the kids started coming, and that kind of brought them around to have a relationship with us, which we do today, which we're very grateful to God for. My parents still don't believe in Jesus, and nobody on my side believes in Jesus, but we praise God that we have a relationship with him today. We've had a rocky road with a lot of challenges with our relationship with them. Obviously, it's not easy, but we praise God that we see them today and we have a relationship with them today and we get to share the gospel with them. So that's my story.
I was very curious as to what his brother's response was, but also asked if his parents' reaction was normal. Conversions from one family religion to another almost always cause tensions, but is it always this bad when a Jew starts believing in Jesus as the Messiah?
He wasn't with us when we were in the States. He was in Israel. So he kind of saw things from afar, but he came in and we had many conversations. And for a while, he was very upset at me and felt that I was breaking up the family and causing so much pain to our parents. So he blamed me, which is very understandable. And he came to our wedding. My parents didn't, but he did come. And then because he came, I kind of felt like I should honor him. So I asked him to be my best man, which he said yes. And he wasn't very helpful or encouraging, of course, during the wedding. So that was kind of hard. But then when it was time for him to make the toast, he took the opportunity to express a lot of his own pain and kind of blaming me for what's happening with the family and whatever. So that wasn't very good or very nice. So that kind of created a rift between us. That took a while to repair and it took him a while to apologize for and for us to kind of rebuild trust in our relationship. It's very difficult having to forgive and having to look past that, which of course Jesus calls us to do. And I'm grateful that he gave me the opportunity to grow in that aspect of it. Obviously, I'm not perfect, and obviously I still have a lot of growth. But when God brings those challenges to us where we have to live out our faith, when we have to forgive those that hurt us, when we have to love our enemies, not my brother's enemy, but just all those challenges that we have that God asks us to do are growth opportunities for us. And when he asks us to trust him, so if we have to do something that would be a risk, taking a risk for God, or those are opportunities for us to trust the Lord, and it's good for us, right? So that we can grow in our faith. So it's not that it's uncommon. If I hear somebody, a Jewish person who comes to faith, that gets rejected by their family, I'm not surprised by it. And I would say that when I came to faith in 97. And back then, I think it was more common. I think today it's less. I'm hearing less and less stories of Jewish people being rejected by their family. It still happens, of course. And again, none of us who are involved in Jewish evangelism are surprised by it. But I think times have changed. Well, right now we're in a season where we're seeing a lot of openness among Jewish people. Part of it has to do with the rising anti-Semitism and the war in Gaza and what's happening and all that. And so we are seeing more openness, which again, so we're seeing Jewish people come to faith and less of that hostile reaction. When I came to faith and had all these issues with my family, Jews for Jesus was the ministry that was there and really ministered to me and helped in my discipleship and all that process. So early on, even just when I came to faith, when I realized this miracle and what I had, the gospel, grace, I realized that there's so many of my Jewish people, including my family, who never heard the gospel. And I thought, wow, if they could hear the gospel in a clear way, especially in Israel, in Hebrew, if they can even just hear the name Yeshua, I thought, wow, they'll all come to believe in Jesus, just like me, right? I was kind of naive about it. So as I was looking at and figuring out what's the best ministry out there to share the gospel with Jewish people, I came across Jews for Jesus, and it was the ministry that's also ministered to me now. I don't know that we're the best, but back then as a young believer, I sure thought that. So it was very natural for me to join Jews for Jesus and also being ministered to and being helped so much by the ministry. So it was a very easy fit. It just made sense. But the call that I got, myself and Dina, my wife, to be in Jewish evangelism and Jewish ministry goes beyond Jews for Jesus. We really feel called to our people to share the gospel with our people. And for over 20 years, we did that in Israel. And I served with Jews for Jesus, both as a missionary, then as our Israel director. I even pastored a church in Israel, led worship. And as the ministry in Israel just became bigger and bigger, and when I became the Israel director of Jews for Jesus, we only had like 5 staff. Now we're over 50. Sorry, by the time I left, we were over 50. Now we're over 80. The ministry in Israel is just growing and growing. And that's just a testament of what God is doing. God is on the move in Israel today, right now. God is on the move among Jewish people. We've seen the growth and the expansion. It just made sense for us to answer the call of global leadership within Jews for Jesus. And when that happened, it just made sense for us to move to the States. As you know, I travel a lot and I go to Israel often, obviously still, and very still involved with our work there. But there are Jewish people all over the world, and globally, we want to see Jewish people reached. That's the heart of our ministry, Jews for Jesus. And the Apostle Paul said in Romans, "Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved." And that resonates with me so much, because that's my prayers and my heart desire as well for my people.
Those that have been listening to God on the Move for a while now will be familiar with my next question, although I haven't asked it in quite some time. Dan spoke about his calling, but in my experience, people can mean vastly different things when they use this word. And so many, especially young people, struggle to find their calling, whatever that might mean. And so I asked Dan about his understanding.
So I think first and foremost, for us, it means that no matter what, where, and how, we're called to be a part of our people. And that's rooted in the life and ministry of Jesus. I mean, obviously we're far from what he did and how he did things. But if we think about our faith and what God did, it's a good model for us. Jesus came down to his own. He actually became man. And we don't go to God through Jesus. right? But it's actually God who came down to us in the flesh. Jesus came to us. He gave his life for us, for all of humanity. He went on the cross. He could have chosen another way of salvation, another path, but that's the way that God intended it. So he came down and he dwelt among us. And I think that that's part of our calling, is to be a part of our Jewish people. And we are Jewish as it is. So we try to do the ministry that we do is within the Jewish community. That's part of the calling. So in many ways, obviously when we were in Israel, it was a little bit easier because everybody in Israel is Jewish. But we were part of the Israeli community. When it was time for my daughter, when she turned 18, it wasn't a question, should she go and serve in the Israeli Defense Force? She's Israeli. She was born and raised in Israel, and she was living there, right? And so, of course, she was going to go and serve her country, serve her people, and just like everybody else does. And when it comes to holidays or whatever, and now we don't live in Israel, but do we celebrate the Jewish feast? Of course we do. Do we think every believer in Jesus has to? Of course not. But it's our calling because we are Jewish. So we celebrate those feasts. We're a part of the Jewish community here in New Jersey where we live, because that's part of our calling, as is the calling for every single disciple, follower of Christ on the globe, alive today and in the past and in the present and in the future. It's always our call to make disciples and to be a light and to share the gospel. And our call is to do it within the Jewish community wherever we are. Right now we live in the States. Maybe tomorrow we'll go and live in Berlin. Guess what? If we're going to go and move to Berlin, we would go and live in a Jewish area of Berlin. And there's a lot of Israelis in Berlin. So we would be living and doing life within that community. And that is really the power of the gospel and of the church. I think Hudson Taylor modeled it perfectly for us when he went to China. And in many ways, would we not, because we are part of the Jewish community, or does that mean we're not going to be a part of a local church and the local body? Of course not. Of course we belong to a local church, a local congregation. But that doesn't change what we're doing within the Jewish community, sharing the gospel, building bridges, and also helping our local church engage in Jewish evangelism as well. Because we live in a Jewish area, so the church should be reaching out to Jewish people. Local churches need to be reaching out to whatever community God has placed them in. In our area, it happens to be Jewish people. So we're very strategic about our call. You know, we weren't just going to go to New Jersey and live wherever is most convenient for us or wherever is cheapest or whatever. We went to live in Jewish area because of our call, because of who we are.
This would leave us with the question, who are you? And who are your people? But as Dan's next story shows, the answer to this question might not always be that obvious. Or perhaps more obvious than you think, but it's just not what you think.
So this is a story of actually another Israeli who was brought up in Israel, just like me, in a very typical secular home. But early on in his teens, his family actually moved to France. He lives in Paris. And in Paris, he lived as a secular Jew, very liberal. I think he considered himself an agnostic. So he was Jewish, but it didn't really mean much to him. I mean, yeah, he loved the holidays, loved his parents, and he started working, going to school. And at some point, he met a girl who is Muslim. And just like he was a secular Jew, she was more of a nominal Muslim, but her family are more devout or whatever. You know, they fell in love and they were together and they actually moved in together. And they were, again, typical liberal people, right? But then October 7th happened. And you can imagine he's Israeli Jewish, this thing happening, she's Muslim. And that brought up a lot of emotions for him. And he's got family in Israel, but he's got also family in Paris. And of course, she's got family and things are heating up and getting worse and worse and worse. And all that is bringing up a lot of questions for him in his mind. And he was really struggling in this relationship. So he did what so many people do today, and he just went on Google. And when he went on Google, he started searching Jewish, God, Muslims. And I'm not sure exactly how, but he got to the Jews for Jesus website. And when he got to the Jews for Jesus website, it was very intriguing to him because he never heard of Jewish people who believe in Jesus. And because he was Jewish, he was like, oh, wow, look at this. Can I be Jewish, Muslim? Can they get along? And somehow he got, can Jews and Christians get along? And he found Jews for Jesus. And when he went on there, he was shocked to find out that Jews for Jesus has an office in downtown Paris. not too far from where he and she were living. So he said, hey, let me go in. So he walks in, and on our thing, we have a big Israeli flag and with the Jewish star and whatever. And when he walks in, he meets one of our missionaries there, a guy by the name of Joshua. And Joshua, of course, greets him and starts sharing the gospel with him. And he's really interested. He's really intrigued by it. So they start meeting regularly, studying the scriptures together. And praise God, he comes to faith in Jesus. And when he comes to faith in Jesus, Josh is talking to him now about living the life. And he talks to him about the fact that he's living with, they're not married, they're together. And this guy gets really convicted and he says, yeah, you know what, I need to move out. And of course, he's growing in his faith and he's got baptized and whatever. He's broke up with her, whatever. But here is this is all amazing. This is all how God uses October 7th, whatever. But here is what I love about this story, okay? He is so committed to the Lord and the call that God has on his life that now, you know what he's doing? He's sharing the gospel with that girl and with her family. He's now a Jewish disciple of Jesus. He's a Christian, our brother, and God is calling him to reach out to this Muslim family with the gospel. And that reminds me of the call that Jewish people have had, still have, since the beginning. God called us, the Jewish people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be a light to the nation. And of course, that call is, we can only be a light to nations with the light of the world, with Jesus. So you can't do that unless you have Jesus. And that calling that God has given to the Jewish people, and particularly Jewish people who believe in Jesus. And of course, it's a call for all believers in Jesus to be a light, to make disciples. But it's just so beautiful for me how he's going out there and are sharing the gospel with them. With Muslims. But the point is that we look at October 7th and listen, my community, the Jewish people are suffering, right? Rising anti-Semitism, all those things. And I've prayed and cried out to God so many times, Lord, what? October 7th, what's going on? I don't understand. This is awful. The war in Gaza is awful. There are no winners at war. Everybody is losing. Everybody, there's such pain and suffering among the Palestinians right now, such pain and suffering in Israel among the Jewish people. There's so much of it. And you look up and you say, God, what are you doing? What's going on here? And this is an example of how God has used such a terrible, sinful, and awful, and I don't know how else to call it, right? Demonic event of October 7th and this war and whatever. And how he's using it in people's lives. It's encouraging, and you say, okay, well, God is sovereign. He is.
It reminds me of what Dr. Alison Ruth Kolosova reflected upon in episode 14, when she said, over the years, I've come to the conclusion that through the worst and the most grim situations, and even through the worst, what I might think of the worst and the grimmest people, God can still be at work there, and God can reach people even in situations which are the least bit ideal, or where things aren't happening the way you would love them to be happening, or they may not look as though God's there at all, but He is, and He can be. It made me wonder, especially in situations like that in the Middle East, and in the Holy Land in particular, how can the church bring peace?
I think that the church has a responsibility to advocate for peace, to advocate for gospel. And the gospel crosses borders. Both sides of whatever conflict you look at need the gospel. They need to know the truth and to know the Lord. And so often I find myself and others within the church taking sides. And our one side needs to be the Lord and advocating for the gospel, and not necessarily in our own sense of who's right or what's happening. We need to understand that Jesus, and I'm not saying we don't, but we just need to remember that Jesus called us to love our enemies. And He exhibited that to us, that while we were yet His enemies, He died for us, right? And so that's His call for our lives. For the church in His body, we are to die, even for those that we think are wrong. So of course we need to pray, we need to bring the gospel, we need to be peacemakers and not take sides. So many times we say, oh, this is right, they're wrong, they're whatever. And sometimes, of course, you see things and you're like, no, that was unjust. And we do need to advocate for what's right and for justice. But some of these are such complicated issues, and they're so politically driven. And we need to remember that the one person that we represent is Jesus. We're his church, we're his body. So let's remember that. And I think that that's what we're called for in terms of bringing peace. And I think when we bring gospel, when I say gospel, I mean also, of course, caring for those who are hurting, even if they're on a different side than we are, right? In caring for those that are suffering, and the acts of serving, loving, it's all a part of the gospel. I wanted to clarify that. It's not just the words, but it's also actions, right? We can't be everywhere and do everything, obviously, but to intercede and to pray and to stand with the local church in those regions. Right now, obviously, we see a lot about in the news for Israel. We see a lot in the news, protests and what's happening. And I would say, hey, how can you be a source of grace to that community right now? And if you don't have anybody around you because you're in another part of the world, you can always just stop for a second and intercede and pray. So if you see Israel in the news, I hope that causes you to pray for the people of Israel for salvation, to come to faith in Jesus, and for the local church in Israel to be courageous and bold and to be strong in making disciples. And same thing if you're seeing Palestinians, stop and pray for Gaza. Pray for the church there, the people there, for protection, for strength, for effectiveness in making disciples.
How often do you stop and pray for what you see on the news or social media? At this point, a complete gear shift. But I'm aware of Jews for Jesus' YouTube channel, So Be It, with currently over 600,000 subscribers. I wanted to know a little bit more about this video project of theirs.
So the idea behind the YouTube channel was very simple. We wanted to show the world what it's like for Israelis, what it's like to just, there's so many conceptions, so much that people assume about Israel and about Israelis. One of the things that I still hear in churches all over the world is that people don't understand how many unreached Jewish people are. People assume Christians, but even non-Christian, they assume, Jewish people, they know the Bible, they know the Old Testament, they're the people of the book, right? One of the most popular videos there is the video of us going to Orthodox Jews and reading to them Isaiah 53 and asking them if they know where it's from. Is it Old Testament or New Testament? And you could see one after the other. They say, no, I've never read this. This is not in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament, which is so eye-opening. And video shows that, no, even Orthodox Jews don't know the Old Testament as much as we think they do. That video has been used a lot by God, both to educate Christians, but also Jewish people who watch it around the world. And we've gotten a lot of comments from people who have seen this. We have testimonies of people who have come to faith through this, because the channel, as it's grown, at first it was just kind of interviews on the streets, but then it became where we've got a whole bunch of videos there of testimonies. My testimony, of course, is on there, and other Jewish people have come to faith in Jesus. And Jeff and Alicia, the two that do the channel for us, and they've gone to other parts of the world. So they've left Israel and went to Paris and to New York City and to Los Angeles and other places. So the channel continues to grow, and it's a big blessing just to be able to use this medium to share the gospel.
As always, there is so much more to say. More about the YouTube channel So Be It, more about Jewish evangelism, and so much more about the church's responsibility in conflict situations. But now, to wrap it up, I asked Dan to share something that's on his heart, and then prayer requests, so we can intercede more intentionally.
So if I had to say one thing to the church, everyone, it would have to be back to what Jesus called all of us to do, the Great Commission, making disciples of all nations, and to remember that wherever you're at, God has placed you there on purpose. We're all a part of the body, and we all need each other, and we need to work together, but you're also placed in this particular context among those particular people for a reason. And that is to fulfill God's call on our life. And that's to make disciples. And it's not just for those who are in full-time ministry. It's not just for those who are missionaries or pastors or whatever, but it's for everybody. We need to all work together to fulfill that. And so bringing Christ to everyone. I would say for me, in my context, obviously, we want to encourage people to just pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This war that's happening in Israel and in Gaza, and it's just awful. And we're just praying that it would end. and that God would continue to protect. We're trusting that He's protecting the church in Gaza, the church in Israel, the church in that region, in other places, in Yemen. There's so much extremism that just need the Lord. But let's not forget other wars that are happening, like the one in Ukraine and Russia and other parts of the world. We just want to pray for peace and for God to use His church in those countries, in those areas, to bring in the gospel of peace, to bring in the hope that we have in Messiah Yeshua and Jesus Christ. God has the church in those places for such a time as this. And we just need to pray and see how we can help as the church that's outside of those regions and those areas. So pray that peace would come and reign and that many would come to know the Lord.
You have listened to the God on the Move podcast, which is part of the Lausanne Movement's wider God on the Move initiative, where we want to share inspiring God stories from the global church with the global church. Through listening to what God is doing all around the world, we hope to encourage and challenge the global church to faithful obedience to the Great Commission. So let's accelerate global mission together toward a vision for the gospel for every person, disciple-making churches for every people and place, Christ-like leaders in every church and sector, and kingdom impact in every sphere of society. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to subscribe and follow us for more.